Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, your GM, your guide. This is your host. This is just a show where we sit around and we talk about things that we love, things that we like, things that inspire joy and beauty in our gaming experience. And we've got some cool things coming up on the show um, in the future. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But first of all, to all who celebrate Knife Day, happy Knife Day. That's what the chat has been talking about. So welcome to Grom and Padre and John Doom and Tink. Good to see all of you today. So today we are talking about, many of you know I have a deep and abiding love for Savage Worlds. I run just a lot of Savage Worlds, and today we're talking about the Savage Worlds Fantasy Companion. I'm actually going over this because every year I run a little get together for some of my friends from all over the country. We call it TPK, Total Party Con, con with a K. And this year we're finishing up a second edition D&D game. We've already got next year planned. We're going to do a Wrath and Glory game. And then the year after that, we're returning to the world of Tanar, which is one of my two home brood worlds that I just continue to come back to. The other one being the Zaharets of Jackals. And we're going to wrap up some storylines like this. We've run, for our 10th anniversary, we're going back to the world that kind of started this whole thing. And I'm running it in Savage Worlds, and this is the book that I was waiting for. So, for those of you who don't know, Savage Worlds is a generic system that promises fun, fast, and furious action. And it delivers. I love Savage Worlds for this reason. I've done a lot of discussion of Savage Worlds on this channel. If you want to learn more about Savage Worlds, go check out the playlists that we have that behind the screen. Just search for Savage Worlds. You'll find a ton of information there. And what they do is, it's a generic system. So while they do have their own dedicated settings like East Texas University, Rifts, Deadlands, Holler, and others. Hey, Rook, thanks for the subscription. 46 months, man. Cheers. In 2 more months, we'll do a 4-year anniversary call out. But if you don't want one of their specific settings, they publish Companions. That is a collection of useful tools. It's a toolbox, really, to help you run a game in that genre. The ones that are currently out, we have the Superpowers Companion for running superhero games. We have the Fantasy Companion for all of your fantasy needs. And then we have the Horror Companion, which the PDFs have gone out, and we're waiting for the physical books to be delivered. So, we're going to look at the Fantasy Companion and why I love it, and why, if you want to run a fantasy game with Savage Worlds, why I think you should check this out, possibly over getting Savage Pathfinder. Now, if you want to get both, go ahead, but I'll explain my reasoning behind that as we get to the end of this. So, like all of the companions, you're going to get new edges, you're going to get new hindrances, you're going to get new things that are very focused on a fantasy campaign. You're also going to get a ton of gear, and this is where we start getting some of the really unique stuff that I think is excellent in this book. There's an entire section on strongholds. For those of us who come from older school gaming, or those of us who just have a conqueror's nature at heart, we've got the rules for building out strongholds, capturing strongholds, designing our own bases of operations for our fantasy campaigns. Rook, I know you're running your Swade game, and I really want you to do a recap on the Iconic Discord, which is only for patrons. So if you are a fan of Iconic, head over to patreon.com/iconicproduction. Join the patronage and get access to a really cool group of people who hang out and chat about everything on our Discord server. And then what really kind of makes Savage Worlds unique among the generic role-playing games is its use of setting rules. Most generic games just say, hey, here are the rules that you need to play. Here are the components for making a character. If you go to the hero system, here are the components for making the components of a character. But what distinguishes Savage Worlds is Savage Worlds understands that to replicate the genres well, there needs to be more than just, hey, these skills are available, these powers are available. This and they do that with setting rules. Setting rules allow you to dial in the rules of the game to suit the genre of game you're going to run. And for this game, we have a ton of new setting rules. Things like how new attacks work. Is betrayal just a common thing where your players should expect to be betrayed? And you can take these setting rules, mix and match them, and create your own unique flavor of Savage Worlds for your game table. Is healing more difficult? Are there downtime actions? There's going to be a lot of space between adventures. What do we do about giant foes? Should villains be allowed to have conviction, that unique resource that usually only wildcards get? And then, whoever wrote this section, you are a person after my own heart. We did a long breakdown of all of the subgenres of fantasy. Heroic, high, grim, dark, sword and sorcery. And they give you a overview of all of the fantasy styles, and then what rules to use for that sort of game. So for example, they gave us, and I would actually argue, I would, whoever wrote this, if you would like to get into a lively debate with me, let's chat about your fantasy style buckets. So dark fantasy, I'm just going to read dark fantasy real quick. This type of fantasy genre intentionally blends elements of horror, pitting humanity against creatures of the night, madness, and human frailty, or perhaps even from horrors from beyond time and space. These worlds often have a gothic feel and may include technological and political advancements more in line with the Renaissance than typical medieval feudalism of fantasy fiction. And they give you common setting rules, which, you know, they're going to say, hey, heroes in this game should have conviction, dynamic backlash, gritty damage, hard choices, high adventure, and villainous conviction. And then what I love is they give you some examples from other games and from literature. So the examples they give are Martin Lawrence's Broken Empire series. Totally agree. Glenn Cook's Black Company. I can see where you're coming from there. Michael Moorcock's Elric Saga. Ravenloft from Dungeons and Dragons. Warhammer, not counting Age of Sigmar. The Witcher, Legend, and the Dark Crystal. But they also put Malazan, Books of the Fallen in there, and I'm like, Malazan's not dark fantasy. I mean, the whole premise is about compassion, and there are not any alien horrors. I would put Backer's Second Apocalypse like 100% into there. So Grimdark would probably fall in this case under dark fantasy. But if you also just want a great look of what examples there are in fiction and gaming, this is a great overview. So Grom loves these sections, but it does point to his biggest problem with the Fantasy Companion. It does, I can see where you're coming from on that, Grom. It does kind of lean more into the classic high fantasy for the larger rule set than just all of these options that they give. And these options are great, and you really would lean into the setting rules here, but I can see where you're coming from. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, D&D is sort of the lingua franca of fantasy, and it's what a lot of people associate with it. I would heavily play with the arcane backgrounds that they give and limit the magic items. I think that's something they could have talked about a little bit more in this book. Because if you just go into this book, you pick your setting rules, and you assume that you have the plethora of treasures and options for arcane backgrounds, you will get a very D&D style game. If you limit what's available, that's where you're going to start pairing that up with the setting rules and get a unique feel and flavor for your game. But, you know, starting off with that, they give you a ton of new arcane backgrounds. Alchemists, bards, clerics, druids, diabolists, necromancers, illusionists, elementalists. For some reason, I'm reading right to left as opposed to left to right. Shamans, sorcerer. My son, I'm starting a high fantasy or a sword and sorcery Savage Worlds game just one-on-one with my son, and he was playing a sorcerer and really kind of loves it. Summoner, tinkerer, but not a Tinker Hellraiser. That's interesting. warlock or witch, and wizard. And then you get a ton of new like domains, which is very D&D. What aspects do your gods have? New powers, new magic items. The magic item tables feel ripped out of a very D20 fantasy game, where it's like, hey, this table is scrolls, and this table is wondrous items, and this table is magic weapons and armor. But you get a lot, and you get a lot of great examples, and then it ends with a bestiary. So for $45, you get all of that. That plus the Suede rulebook, you could run a fantasy campaign for years, constantly making tweaks, removing some arcane backgrounds, adding new ones in as the campaign world evolves, or just when the campaign ends, start a new one and pick a different set of setting rules and go forward from there. Yeah, Padre, I can see where they're talking about dark fantasy. I would argue that Warhammer Fantasy is a bit more, I'm going to steal straight from my buddy Ben. He calls it grimsical, sort of a grim whimsy to the world. If you read the Enemy Within, one of the first NPCs you name is Baron Sapanatheim. So it's Baron von Sapanatheim, Once Upon a Time, the first NPC that you meet. There's an entire halfling war that goes on called the War of it's like the War of Cheese. Anyway, it's all about dairy farmers and bakers, and it's called Where There's a Will, There's a Way, W-H-E-Y, that grimsical nature. So Malazan isn't dark fantasy. All right. So anyway, this is wonderful. I would say, Grom, have you checked out the Rifts, the Dragon Juicer framework? Pretty cool. A little bit of magical powered juicer. Uses dragon's blood. Tink is basically challenging me on Malazan not as dark fantasy. All right, so here's the thing. For me, dark fantasy, Raced is not a horror in the Lovecraftian or grimdark sense, something from beyond the world that shatters your mind and corrupts your body. Raced is, an undead creature, an undead tyrant that, yes, is hell-bent on control and domination. But for me, like the Inkaroi of the Second Apocalypse, these alien creatures that have come and they've warped flesh, chaos in Warhammer, and 40k that corrupt the soul and the mind and the body. Malazan, to me, while it has alchemical munitions, it never really strays that far into the almost Renaissance-y level of technology that kind of is associated with the more dark fantasy. Also, dark fantasy for me has to deal a lot with themes. And the themes of dark fantasy are almost always holding up a mirror to our own awfulness. Things don't end well for good characters or noble people. They end well for the bloodthirsty and the almost sociopathic characters. Think of Game of Thrones. Think of Baker's Second Apocalypse. Joe Abercrombie. I'm doing a year of grimdark, and so I've just started the First Law over again. And nothing ends out well for those people who are the noble characters that you want to end out well. They work out well for the conniving and the backstabbing. So again, Malazan's core thing of compassion is what defines humanity. I think it's just antithetical to a dark fantasy theme. All right, so to answer Grom's question, is the Dragon Juicer, I think it's in, pulled the right book out and opened to the right page. It is on page 7 of Arcana and Mysticism, which is book 4 of Savage Rifts. you're going to wait to write your thesis challenging my assertion until I finish the series. Totally fair. I will. Okay, so you haven't even gotten here yet, Tink. But I would argue that maybe you could argue that the crippled god is akin to a Lovecraftian horror. But I still would not. I could see that argument being made, but I will prepare my refutation in case you choose that line. My rebuttal, if you choose that line of thought. So that brings us to the end of the Fantasy Companion. Why would I say this over Savage Pathfinder? I love both. I would run both. I have run both. But Savage Pathfinder really is focused on delivering a Golarion class-based experience for the players. The rest of Fantasy Companion is really focused on a more broad fantasy campaign. So if you really want to run something for your friends who love D&D and you want something close enough to that to seduce them to Savage Worlds, Savage Pathfinder is a great start. If you got a group that just wants to play a fantasy game, I would actually start with the Fantasy Companion. You can start off as novices. It's way less complicated than the class edges. But they both exist, and they're both great. Black Company. So I've read all of Black Company, John, and it's not a series I'm going to go back to. I really enjoyed it. I thought some of the characters were fantastic. Croker is amazing. I love the idea of the lady. Like, the lady is a great character, and all of those people that she was bound to and with by the tyrant. In fact, I'm using that as an inspiration for something in the Zaharettes. But I don't know that I ever need to read it again. I can see why it was groundbreaking when it came out, but I'm on my 7th reread of Malazan. I would much rather reread Malazan than go back to the Black Company. Tink, I would love to put together a Malazan Savage Worlds game. I have multiple ideas of how to do it and have like multiple threads, and everybody gets 3 characters would be my idea. You would get a Malazan soldier, you would get some other non-Imperial related character, and then you would get someone on kind of the Ascendant level like Rake or Caladan Brood, and all 3 stories would kind of interweave and move about. So that's it for Savage Worlds Fantasy Companion. If you like what you've heard, there'll be a link in the show notes when it hits live on YouTube on where you can pick it up. Next week, specifically for Padre, we're going to talk about the Quick Chase deck for Savage Pathfinder. And then for Tink has requested a look at ETU. So we're going to look at ETU and ETU Study Abroad in preparation for the release of Pine Box Middle School later this year. So I'll put a link to the Malazan series Humble Bundle on the Discord link. Maybe I should do a Malazan, just a Malazan Books of the Fallen discussion. We'll do that after ETU. Put it on the calendar. We'll do a Malazan overview and discussion. But if you like military fantasy, which is the genre, epic, high military fantasy is how I would describe it. It follows several squads from the Empire in various campaigns that all ties together just wonderfully. And if you like series that they're self-contained, but there's a lot of them, there are currently 2 of the series are done, and then there is 1, 2, 3, 4 that are in process in various books. There's always more Malazan to read. Yes, Rook. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. Thank you guys all so much for showing up and enjoying this. We just crossed 890 people on the YouTube channel, we're almost to 900. When we get to 1,000, we're going to give away like 6 Fading Suns books and a bunch of additional things. So I'm really looking forward to it. I will talk to you all next week. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I will see you all on Tuesday. Have a good one.